Okay, good afternoon to all, and welcome to our Maximos Seminar. We are in year 2, seminar 19. We are still with the Ambigua, volume 2. We're looking at pages 287 through 307 today. So that's Ambigua 67 and 68. 67 and 68. Now, there's continuity, of course, thematic and detailed between our readings. So these themes, or the themes that we'll look at today, kind of follow from what we began to explore last time. The themes are gathering, and the gift, and not only the gift, but how we complete the gift, a completion of the gift, which requires discernment and presence. So gathering, gift, completion, discernment, and presence. Completion and discernment are probably the two most important. Gathering. The question here is, how do we gather things into coherence? How do we gather things into coherence? Or how do we gather ourselves for the sake of integrity? It's the same question. How do we gather things into coherence, or how do we gather ourselves unto for the sake of integrity? Now, last time we spoke about the gift being movement and time and nature. We're staying with that, but this time when we think of the gift, we want to think of it in terms of our life, in terms of the manifestation of the Holy Spirit. In that God is with us, we are given to understand that God is with us and blesses our energies, our energia, our activity. And so we begin to focus on how the gift is given, its shape, so to speak, what we are given to complete, as it were. We are told that the Holy Spirit blesses our breathing. He gives us breath and our making, our rhythms of time. To bless, as David Go likes to remind us wonderfully, is to recognize as such with love. It's to recognize as such with love. So the Holy Spirit blesses our breathing and our making, our activity as such with love. Our own activity of making or composition itself is a gathering unto an end. We gather things unto an end. It also means a giving form for the sake of, to give form to something for the sake of something else. Last time we used the word rendering to speak of this same movement, rendering. Another word is offering, or being unto. So our making and our being are as one. That's our activity. Our making and our being are as one. It's one of the key ideas. And there is one for the sake of the fulfillment of our being in God. So our being and making are as one for the sake of the fulfillment of our being in God. Now, so we're speaking about giving form. Last time we said, or we considered the idea that form implies or invokes, is associated with both the potential for both deformation and transformation. But the difference between form being deformative or transformative in encounter is our discernment of, what is present. We want our presence, or the presence we offer, our being and our making, to be transformative, not deformative in relation. So thinking of things in relation. In this sense, form is always apophatic, as we've been using this word, always more than its own. It's always transforming itself unto more beauty. Right. One of the examples that we face in these readings are numbers. So we could suggest that the form of the number 1 and the form of the number 3 are beyond us, beyond our notion of transformation. But 2, or twofold being, or dyadic being, as Maximos says here, that is part of our gift, which we can complete either in terms of our twofold being in God, as Maximus says, or with duplicity, with pretense, with falseness. And so our discernment begins with 2, as it were, either unto symbolic or unto duplicitous being. In duplicitous being, our being and our making are not as one. When our being and our making, i.e. all of our creative, all of our formative energy, another way of thinking about being and making is our existence and then what we do, our creative activity, being and making. When our being and our making are not as one, we are incomplete. And the form our person gives in relation is one of, or has the ethos of the horizon of deformation rather than transformation. So when we are not integral in ourselves, and when we then become duplicitous in relation, all of our relations are deforming rather than transforming. So our being and our making need to be as one. All right, that's by way of introductory remarks. Now, we only are looking at 2 Ambigua today, so let's turn to them. I'll read each of them and then just give an overview of the Ambigua before we head into some specific passages. The first is on page 287. 287, please turn to 287. This is Ambiguum 67. And I will read just Gregory's text that Maximus has extracted for us. This is from, Maximus says, this is from Gregory's same oration on Holy Pentecost. Here's Gregory. Jesus himself, the pure perfection, knew how to feed 5,000 men in the desert with 5 loaves. And again, he knew how to feed 4,000 with 7. And in the former, after they were satisfied, there were 12 baskets left over, whereas in the latter, there were 7 baskets. None of these details, as it seems to me, is without a reason or unworthy of the Spirit. Read that again. Jesus himself, the pure perfection, knew how to feed 5,000 men in the desert with 5 loaves. And again, he knew how to feed 4,000 with 7. And in the former, after they were satisfied, there were 12 baskets left over, whereas in the latter, there were 7 baskets. And then Gregory comments on his own thought, as it were. None of these details, as it seems to me, is without a reason or unworthy of the Spirit, is without the Logos or without the blessing of the Holy Spirit. So just musing generally on this, St. Gregory says, our Lord knew how to. He knew how to complete each gift. He knew how to complete each gift with the fullness of life in abundance. It's an image of presence and giving, as it were. This whole Ambigua, then, is dwelling with the beauty of Christ's completion, but in terms of form and excess, and giving beyond form. Giving beyond form. These numbers are overrun here. Although this beauty is it's gathered in terms of numbers, right? To show perhaps what it means for numbers, as it were, to draw near life. or to take or to be the form of completion of beauty and an encounter, a scene of communion. We sometimes treat sincere engagement with numbers lightly, but Christ does say when 2 or 3 are gathered, and we speak about isolation, and isolation is oneness. So there is some simple truth too that we can glean. This Ambigua goes on too for some pages, and it is broken up in sections by titles saying another contemplation, another theoria, right? Another way or mode of partaking, of participating in this beautiful meaning. Right? Here we are again. It's another form of enumeration. It's saying there's not just one way to proceed. Be careful. If you think there's one way, be careful. That's where certainty lies. So that's Ambiguum 67. Ambiguum 68 is on page 305. And the section from Gregory is very brief, but it's extraordinarily rich. So page 305, this is Ambiguum 68, and Maximus introduces it as from St. Gregory's same oration on Holy Pentecost. Now here is Gregory's text. And there is a difference of gifts, which stands in need of yet another gift for the discernment of what is better. And there is a difference of gifts, which stands in need of yet another gift for the discernment of what is better. All right, we're going to come back and begin our whole conversation here, but just a few overview notes. So this Ambigua addresses the well-being of how we gather together in the economy of God. And it's about the soundness and integrity of this gathering, not only sound, but integrity. What he is looking to here is presence for and in transformation, presence for transformation of oneself and of the other, but also presence in transformation, not within the invoked horizon of deformation. Now, the presence needed for transformation must be both utterly clear, partake of truth, and at the same time fathomless, utterly clear and fathomless, such that its hearer needs to be conjoined beyond interest, beyond their own interest, with its word in order to become complete. There's a giving of self here, too, within this transformative encounter. This presence then becomes presence for the sake of, when, as Christ says, 2 or more are gathered in fellowship. When 2 or more are gathered, presence becomes presence for the sake of. And Maximus says, through our intimate communion, we complete each other's gifts. We complete each other's gifts as we are together gathered unto the divine. So the completion that we see modeled in Ambiguum 67 is what is silently in the background of Ambiguum 68. Our Lord knew how to complete each gift with the fullness of life. Maximus is talking in Ambiguum 68 how we struggle with that. All right, let's look at a couple of passages, 3 from Ambiguum 67 and then 1 from Ambiguum 68. So the first is on the bottom of page 289. Page 289. Ambiguum 67. It's that section beginning another contemplation of the same at the bottom of 289. or the number 12, the remnant 12, the excessive 12, signifies, or the number 12 signifies the understanding of created beings and ages, insofar as they are subject to motion and circumscription. So, or the number 12 signifies the understanding of created beings and ages, insofar as they are subject to motion and circumscription, and are marked by attributes of quiddity, quality, and mode of existence. For everything that is in motion and has been created is subject to a beginning, and for this reason is absolutely subject to time, even if it is a form of time not measurable by motion. For every created thing has a beginning of its being, since there was a time when it began to exist, and it is subject to extension in time from the moment when it began to exist. If then every created thing exists and is in motion, then it is absolutely subject to nature and time, the one on account of its existence, nature, and to the other on account of its motion, time. And it is through the combination of these two that the reckoning of 12 is completed. So the number 12 here signifies the understanding of created beings and ages, insofar as they're subject to motion and circumscription, which are then conditioned by time and nature. This phrase with which he begins signifies the understanding, insofar as they are. Signifies an understanding, the understanding, insofar as they are. This presents an image of truth, of drawing into presence or bringing to light. But this image of truth is only available concretely, aesthetically. So Maximus uses the number 12 as part of the aesthetic mode. This passage is also about how our concepts complete our existence, as it were, help to render it whole. Right? That all of creation has a beginning means that all becomes known initially in time, in terms of time. In other words, insofar as they are of time. One could, well, so the known horizon of movement or kinesis is time. Maximus uses the word chronos here, or a derivation of the word chronos. And the known horizon of existence is nature, Fusin. The known horizon of movement is time, and the known horizon, our known horizon of existence is nature. And we are given to know that our being, our movements, our existence, is drawn forth beyond time and nature. Our being is drawn forth beyond time and nature, as we know them now, somehow. We don't know how, but as we know them now. But the horizon of movement is time, and the horizon of existence is nature. Beyond that is synergetic activity, not our own. So a couple of thoughts on that passage, and we can return to each of these as we please. Next, please turn to page 295. The next passage we'll read from page 295. And I'll read it again before asking them, each of you, to do so. About 6 lines into the section that begins on that page, another contemplation, beginning with the sentence, for the decad is also a monad. It's about 2, 4, 6. It's the 7th line down. beginning for the decad is also a monad. For the decad is also a monad, since it is the definition of things defined, the ambit of things in motion, and the limit of all arithmetical sums. That's one, the number one monad. The dyadic, twofoldedness, or two-ness. The dyadic, again, is the structure of all beings after God, namely, all sensible beings, which, being combined of matter and form, constitute a dyad, nature and time, matter and form. And intelligible beings too, noetic beings too, since they are a combination of substance and substantial qualities that give their substance form. And then here's where we're getting to. We're getting to simplicity. For there exists absolutely no created thing, which strictly speaking is simple, since it is not simply this or that, but possesses a constitutive and determining difference, which is considered with it as in an underlying substance, constituting it as a particular thing, and clearly distinguishing it from every other thing. Thus, no thing in any way at all, no thing in any way at all, that substantially possesses something considered with it in the manifestation of its proper existence, can strictly speaking, be simple. No thing in any way at all that substantially possesses something considered with it in the manifestation of its proper existence, i.e., it's a being in relation, can strictly speaking be simple. All right, that's amazing. So, some thoughts here too. He begins by talking about relation, or our being in relation, our being as relation. The word relation, actually I hadn't looked it up until this week, is akin to religion. It's linked in etymology, the REL at least. Both of them have their roots in the term, well, the Latin term that gives rise to our English word referere, to carry back. So refer means to carry back. So relation and religion are both linked etymologically with refer. To carry back, then, to refer is distinct from metaphor, which means to carry over, and also, say, forbearance, which means to hold, in stasis. So here, one might say that to relate, our being in relation. To relate means to inevitably refer back to something or to someone as if one's own, as if part of one's own. To inevitably refer back to something or someone as if one's own, as if part of one's own. So now, just shifting to simplicity. Relation finds its completion in movement. Relation finds its completion in movement and has its beginning, as Maximus says, in a dyadic being, two-ness, twofoldedness. Relation finds its completion in movement and has its beginning in two-ness. Simplicity does not know relation. Simplicity does not know relation. And so one might say, a simple person need not refer, for they are of a simple wholeness themselves, beyond the inclination for wrong-headed movements. We call them holy fools in our tradition. Simplicity does not know relation. That's the key. If simplicity does not know relation, then how can one know simplicity? How can one know simply? Because we are beings in relation. Well, I think Maximus gives us a couple of clues. One of which is in what we called last time, his forecast images of truth, partaking of a truth beyond time and giving us an image of that. Part of it also, though, is via our own our own stance of reverence and humility, our own openness. And I want to muse on a word for a minute. It's a term. Maximus uses it on page 293. The context is not super important, but I can tell you, it's just in the middle of that full another contemplation on page 293. And the term is admit of. Admit of. I want to ponder this in terms of simplicity. So Maximus says, or it signifies the things of the present and the things of the future, since things present naturally admit of the number 4. They admit of the number 4. Whereas future things admit of the number 8. He's describing a relation here, which is not very clear. Right? What does 4 have to do with nature? And what does 8 have to do with? Well, it's a way of layering on meaning to be coherent. Admit here, admits, I think, indicates some kind of welcome, some kind of openness, some kind of hospitality to being completed in this mystical way. Of, the word of, in this seminar, we've characterized of as the apophatic movement, just like as is the aesthetic movement. So this is considering someone as a man of God or a woman of truth is different than considering someone as someone as a teacher or someone as a thinker. The as is about form and of is about Genesis. So admit of means mystically welcome the completion of particular meaning in terms of. Mystically welcome the completion of particular meaning in terms of. And so when Maximus is talking about these baskets of food and adding 4 or 8 to it, he's mystically welcoming the completion of particular meaning in terms of numbers here. That's all. So this admit of also means has room for, without being defined by. It has room for. We can admit of this without being defined by it. And we can use that word definition in its strict sense. It doesn't provide a horizon. It can't, because it's simple. But I think we can admit of the simple in our synergy. That's a thought that we may return to. I think that's the best way I can put it right now. If the simple does not know relation and we only know relation, the movement has to be an apophatic beyond, not a definition by positive or negative. All right. Oh, Michael, would you mind reading a little bit, please?
Yeah. Which
I did the simple one, the easy one. Now I'm handing you the harder ones.
there isn't already simple ones.
So page 297, it's just 297 over to 299. So actually, just after where we ended there, another contemplation beginning, or again, the number 12 alludes.
Okay.
To the end of that section over on 299. So landing on, we arrive at the most complete number 12. We're not really looking at numbers here, but those are the markers.
I'm sorry, where do you want him to begin?
Pardon me, page 297 at the beginning of that section.
Okay.
That begins another contemplation, just over to the end of that brief section on 299.
Just picking up where you ended your reading. Okay.
Please, indeed.
Another contemplation. Or again, the number 12 alludes in a rather hidden way to the divine essence and its active energy. The divine essence is manifested through the number 3, since it is praised as a trinity on account of its tripostatic existence. For the monad is a trinity, being perfect in perfect hypostases, that is, in the mode of its existence. And the trinity is truly a monad in the principle of its essence, that is, in the principle of its being. As for the active energy, it is indicated by the number 6, for this is the only perfect and complete number within the decad, being constituted from its own parts and containing both general and unequal numbers, by which I mean even and odd numbers. And thus it alone is perfect among perfect things, in respect of the principle according to which they exist, efficiently producing and protecting them, preserving their essences, and maintaining their unequal qualities. For the means that move midway between extremes are unequal when compared to the ever-moving repose of the extremes. Let me offer one example of what I mean, from which those who are assiduous in learning might understand the meaning of all the others. An extreme is, and God said, let us make man according to our image and likeness. A mean is, and God made man, made male and female, he made them. Again, an extreme is, in Christ Jesus there is neither male nor female. That these extremes and means are unequal, since the latter have male and female, whereas the former do not, is due to the productive and containing power of the divine energy. I think that the supremely wise Moses, having mystically learned of this energy, in his goodness subtly disclosed it to the rest of mankind when he wrote that God created the whole world in 6 days. Now, if to this creative energy, following the sequence and order, we suitably reckon the providence and judgment of beings as part of creation, for they are contained within it, we arrive at the most complete number 12.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you. That's great. So a few thoughts to spark our consideration of this. It would be interesting, perhaps later, excuse me, to come back to Maximus's sense of extreme and mean. But I find that quite profound, and I'm not sure how to handle that just now. So a few other thoughts. First of all, Maximus says that our being is involved in how we phrase things. Our being is involved in how we phrase things in terms of a specific horizon. So he's phrasing the divine here in terms of a specific horizon, numbers and the other imagery that he's used in this and other Ambigua. He says that beyond yet within us, beyond yet within our being is the monad, the principle of essence. Within yet beyond us, within yet beyond our being is the Trinity. So beyond yet within our being is the monad. Within yet beyond our being is the Trinity. It's an emphasis. It's like emphasizing the transcendence of the incarnate Christ, or the incarnation of the transcendent Christ. Here, we see that the logos, the monad gives, and the tropos, or the mode, the Trinity, distributes. So we're given to understand that the Father gives, the logos gives, or the essence of God, the logos of God, and the tropos, the form, the mode, distributes. One is beyond us. We've said that before. The number one is beyond us. 3, Maximus suggests, the number 3 is the completion and perfection of our two-folded being. Our two-folded being means formed, movement, and time. Form, movement, and time. Those are our elements. But our two-folded being also means participation and communion. we begin to be in communion through participation with something. He seems to suggest here that what he calls the extreme provides. I'm not sure how else to put it. And the means help us discern what has been provided. So his use of extreme and mean here. I think the extreme provides and the means discern. So his example of an extreme is, and God said, let us make man according to our image and likeness. That provides. The discernment which follows that is, and God made man, male and female, he made them. That's where relation enters into it. We leave behind the simple. We begin to enter into composite being. And so our effort to discern, or our struggle, is to strive to discern the appropriate completion of God's own creation in ourself. And the final point, our knowledge of God is knowledge of his divine energies. We are taught that creation is suffused with the divine energies of God, not the divine essence. That is why he is beyond, even though within. But we know in relation, we begin to participate in the divine energies of God. That's our mode of relation. This is what makes our questioning of the simple difficult, because we need to participate in the simple in order to know it. But our being in relation means that we cannot simply participate in the simple. Now, I was reading Zizioulis last week, and there's a lovely little passage that stands out around this. He makes a very good point, I think. It's drawn from Cyril of Alexandria, or it's a play on Cyril of Alexandria's notion of the nature of Christ. This is what John Zizioulis says in Being as Communion. This is on page 9.4. It's just a simple idea. He says, creaturely truth, our truth, is dependent upon something else in which it participates. This is truth as communion by participation. Truth as communion by participation. We enter into communion by participation, and we participate not only with what we say and do, but with our being. But then Zizioulis has another clause, and he says, this is compared with God, who is truth as communion without participation. Communion without participation. So even our mode of knowing, we have to be careful. That is a mode. It's part of how we've completed the gift that we've been given. We complete communion by our participation, or we complete our preparation for communion by participation. But we have to be wary not to project that onto God, right? So this is the further reminder that we do not divinize terms, even the terms we hold very highly or with full reverence, like the simple or like presence. They're not divinized terms. God does not participate in them. Okay, now let's hold that in mind and focus a little bit more on discernment and indeed making one's own, and what turned out to be community and tradition. So page 305, please. David, I'd like to ask you to read just as it were part of a paragraph on page 305. This is from Ambiguum 68. So it's the last, the other Ambiguum we'll be looking at today. You see at the bottom, 7 lines up from the bottom of page 305, David, where it begins, or lest it perhaps be someone moved, just to the end of that sentence that ends with orphaned ideas, orphaned words and ideas.
Or lest it perhaps be someone moved by vainglory to arrogate to himself the utterances of others, speaking and propounding things that he himself did not bring forth, winning praise through his lies, a pseudo-sage, shamelessly posing as the spurious father of orphan words and ideas.
Thank you. This we're going to look at Ambiguum 71, which is on play next seminar. After his idea of play, this seems to me as one of the most important things that Maximus has said in all of his Ambigua. Somehow, he is using language here which may seem roughly shod, but we know that Maximus is not given to speaking passionately or impassionately, and so let's take him seriously. So here are some thoughts. And this circles around the ideas of partaking of the gifts, participation, inheritance, usurpation, and the father of lies. So how we make something our own. So partaking of the gifts of tradition. We are told that Christ is and will be all and all, and Christ is and will be all and all. So the gift is given. The gift is given. We just need to complete it, as it were. And here, Gregory and Maximus is talking about completion in terms of community, interpersonal being, or in terms of tradition, we could say. Tradition involves meaning not only phrased over time, but meaning phrased beyond time. So the truths of tradition are not necessarily, let's say, time-bound truth. They're not truths of time. They may admit of time's truths, but they're not truths of time. Now, we begin to participate of meaning phrased beyond time. In other words, of simple meaning that the tradition offers to us via appropriation. In the sense of appropriation means to make one's own, draw into one's own, become familiar, draw near to, draw forth and unto, right? It's the condition of ecstasy and intimacy and communion. If one jettisons all of the detritus which is accrued to it unwisely over the last one. We begin to partake of meaning, but this meaning is also an inherited meaning. Tradition is not made up on the spot. The great Goethe in Faust has a lovely line characterizing tradition. One of his characters says, "Take what you have inherited from your fathers and make it your own. Take what you have inherited from your fathers and make it your own." Not only is that a lovely, lovely definition of tradition, but it means that it signifies that meaning is always drawing near, drawing into, drawing unto intimacy. It's a question of nearness. Now, one can inherit something appropriately and rightly, but here Maximus seems to be speaking also about usurpation, about the deformation of our presence with others. He uses the word arrogation. Arrogation means to gather unto oneself inappropriately, to take what is not your own. Arrogation is what people mean now publicly by appropriation. But I don't think it's merely arrogation that Maximus is warning us about here. He's warning us against usurpation. So not just taking something which is not of our own, but taking the place of another. This seems to me the telos of ambition. I want to replace you. Place is very important in Maximus because place also is our word for thesis. So place is the kind of anchored orientation from which all things flow. When we are arrogant, we usurp the place of another, whether it be the divine or another person, and we make ourselves the center of meaning, but it is nothing. It's nihilistic because it's counterfeit. So we're standing in for someone else. Maximus uses the term pseudo sage here. He also uses the term, he references lies, and then also a spurious father of orphaned words and lies. One of the most profound images we have of what is of the Antichrist, of the one who tries to usurp the place of Christ, to stand in for Christ. That's our ontological model here. But one of the strongest images we have for the putative usurper of Christ is the father of lies. Father of lies. Now, we've been speaking about the monad a little bit in this session. And in terms of Christian imagery, fatherhood means the essence of creation as gift. It's our term which we use to complete our apprehension of the divine, our name, our word. We use to complete the apprehension of the divine, or rather complete the revealed gift of the trihypostatic being, as Michael read out. So fatherhood is the essence of creation as gift. A father of lies. This is noetic Genesis here. And then lies. In the Brothers Karamazov, the elder, whose name I... Zosima, thank you, pardon, the elder Zosima, says to the Karamazovs, especially Ivan or Dmitri, above all, do not lie to yourself. Do not lie to yourself. Above all, do not lie to yourself. Lies are the idol of truth. They remove us from presence, right? Remove us from communion. And we are taught that our main struggle is not against, say, a concrete force, but the deception against something masquerading as truth or usurping the place of truth. We're taught that this is the only, and it's a mirage, but the only power that, as the tradition terms him, the evil one, right? The one who rebels against God. It's the only power that they have. And so when Gregory is talking about discernment here, he's not talking about nothing. He's talking about the center of everything. Maximus in the Philokalia, he would often talk about grasping and misgrasping, in the Ambigua too. Discernment is, it's not even so much about grasping or misgrasping, but how we're grasping it. That we've grasped something isn't enough. How we're grasping it is important. And that's what Maximus keeps bringing us back to. And Gregory keeps bringing us back to. We are thinking of this in light of what? And so it's not so much, like I said, that we're grasping something, but how we're grasping it. Regardless of its truth, it needs to be drawn near appropriately, not inappropriately, right? So our relation to truth, relation is the important word there. The truth is given, we know that. Christ is in all and will be all in all. We don't fear about that, that's fine. But how we draw near to that and draw near appropriately. And so this gives us an image of tradition, an image of inheritance and participation and meaning shared. Let's begin there. Let's begin there, drawing near appropriately. Tradition, appropriation, usurpation, arrogation. Just to comment almost personally for a moment, when Maximus says, moved by vainglory to arrogate to himself the utterances of others, speaking and propounding things which he himself did not bring forth. That is as sober a measure, I think, as is possible, and it's very sobering. But pardon me. Let's open it up. Let's talk.
Ahead of our session this afternoon, we were just briefly chatting about the problem of appropriation, which has become a topic of concern over the last, I don't know, decade or so. And it's, it'll still remain a kind of controversial kind of fixture in our dealings. And it seems to me that if you are immersed in tradition, especially a tradition that is being pressurized by commercial forms of appropriation, what have you, there is an ideal case where if you are where it would be difficult to resist appropriation as you've explained it, if it really is a kind of making of oneself, making of something one's own genuinely, because that would suggest a kind of salutary convergence of traditions. And that's often not the case. A tricky case would be where one is doing something quite adroitly and impressively and gains a kind of commercial reception for it. Because that is a kind of, that comes close. Perhaps that's a kind of, I guess there's various options. It could be a kind of counterfeit, but competent counterfeit of what someone else is struggling to achieve within their tradition. So there is a kind of convergence, but it's really more of a submerging of one tradition in favor of sort of slick forms of taking over. So it is I have to say, even though I've often kind of reacted against the charge of appropriation, there are instances where I think it is a legitimate concern, even when the appropriation is done very well.
And that even just the ground you set forth is the idea of making something different one's own. Maximus is talking about something which is distinct. I don't know if it's harder or not, but it's making what you assume to be your own actually your own, right? So the words become difficult, but I tried to figure it in terms of our being and our making as one. Yeah. I like that example you give. It makes me very nervous whenever someone is paid something to do something real, especially paid a lot to do something real, because that fissure which you point to it does rear its head there.
I'll just raise one totally different kind of example that is far more ubiquitous and pervasive and more or less invisible. So this is a kind of invisible form of appropriation, which is truly a form of making of something one's own. And what I have in mind will trade on, just so I can provide a kind of reference. It's a fairly well-selling, fairly good-selling book. The name of the author is escaping from a moment, called Dominion, and essentially it's making a case. It's not a very novel case, but it chronicles it in a fairly clear and comprehensive way. The issue of the influence of Christianity in the subsequent secularization of the world. in the 19th and 20th century, and as Christianity has spread its influence far and wide
Tom Holland.
on on yeah, I mean, in kind of horrible. I'm forgetting the name of the author, but in Dominion,
Tom Holland.
Tom Holland. Yes. Thank you, David. Thank you. Holland makes the case. I mean, this is a fairly provocative case, but he makes the case that the influence of Christianity is even extended into other religions as they manifest themselves in the 20th century. That aside, without doubt, he's making a case that is hard to resist. The basic thesis, anyway, is hard to resist. That many people who are earnestly, sincerely, or who have earnestly and sincerely, without conscious effort, absorbed and made ideals of Christianity, modes of thought that were radically unavailable for Christianity, truly their own. It's kind of unsurprising because, of course, Christianity is being part of Western civilization and other civilizations for a very, very long time. And it's strange because it's a form of appropriation, which is salutary in some ways, but it's also, to pick up on a theme that you were making earlier, it's both, and this is just to pressurize a distinction, it's both transformative in good ways and perhaps transformative in ways that are also deforming or impoverishing. And this is a very fraught concept of appropriation. It's especially as, just to kind of round off my thought, reiterate what I said at the beginning, in its invisible forms, the forms which our souls just organically take over that in which we've been immersed for millennia.
Can I try an example? I mean, I don't like to dwell on the negative examples here, but only maybe that it illustrates something. I have, in this last week, read 2 Masters of Theology dissertations from 2 different schools, both of which are written well, both of which show a substantial amount of work, both of which will quote Gregory of Nyssa, Maximus a little bit. But when you look at the footnotes, you realize they're quoting it from a book, a secondary book. These dissertations are about, they really deal with the themes of the Trinity, theosis, the spiritual father or spiritual director, as it's commonly called these days. And both of them have read a lot. But what they've read is all in, it's all very recent books written by a variety of people, some of whom are quite popular kind of contemporary gurus. I found it disturbing. And so I had to wonder why. Why do I find this disturbing? And these are done, like, it's not as if you were talking to the student and they were planning on going somewhere and you could say, oh, well, that's good, but to begin with, let's look at this. So on the one hand, there's a whole industry of these recent books written by capable scholars, some of them more scholarly than others, some of them more popular self-help literature and what have you, some of them from psychology, some from various religious organizations or heads of those organizations which are trying to help people recover contemplation or understand that they're not just worms or what have you. But what's so striking about it is that it's not that they say anything that's wrong. It's as if, or the comparison for me is the difference between somebody who's, like me, who can read a recipe and I don't have to follow it directly, but I could read several of them and I could make the dish and it'd be okay. The difference between that and somebody who really understands pasta, really understands the finest tomatoes from a very small region in Italy, and really has a feel for that Parmesan cheese that's made in the mountains that you won't get in North America. Somebody who really has integrated a knowledge and a feel and a taste for the particular ingredients and for what it means for them to be integrated. In other words, it's the difference between the ability to make something on a recipe and to actually cook a beautiful, beautiful meal. So these two dissertations, they had, one could say, they had integrated the critical literature they'd read, all of which was published, no doubt because their advisors had insisted on it in the last 8 years. But at the end, the kind of critical questions which they had begun with that were niggling at them remained sort of unresolved. It's so, on the one hand, take what you have inherited from your fathers and make it your own. You don't make, this is maybe the difference between appropriation and the way you've spoken about it, Michael, and which we can all be concerned about in our modern culture, when somebody just appliques. You can get all kinds of quackie-oodle art made in China, or all those sorts of things can go. So there's a kind of applique. It appears to be the same, sort of, or even a fake stylistic purse. But when it comes to what Maximus is speaking about in this awful passage of prepondering things which he himself did not bring forth, you can only bring forth things if you have been pregnant with them. You can only bring them forth if they have been digested and have become part of what has fed your new cells. So And the tragedy of it, as it seemed to me in these two dissertations, is that these two students, whoever their professors were that they had talked with about doing this, and I know who they were, at least I can assume who they were. They actually think that the Trinity, that the dance of the Trinity, which is a sexy word these days, perichoresis, they think that these things are concepts, ideas. And they don't understand that they're gifts, and that you have to enter into communion with them as well. It has to be deeply, deeply digested. Well, I don't mean to get carried away with this, but it was so striking to me reading these two and then trying to think of, I mean, it can't influence their grade because it's not their fault. They were told this is what they should do, I suspect. But that's because the professors as well have reduced to a set of ideas a profound understanding of what it means to be a human being and what these relationships are. It's been reduced to a set of concepts which virtually anybody can write about. So let me just stop this by suggesting something else that Andrew and I have talked about in the past, which, and then Andrew can clarify this. So one of the things I thought about as Michael was laying this out as well, and as you had initially spoken about it, and this notion of the simple, has to do with, the way you and I, Andrew, have talked about how particular writers who are extremely competent thinkers will write about the history of theological thought in the Christian East. And, from my point of view, this is good. This is really competent, really, really good. I mean, and valuable, and I appreciate it. But how different it is from when I read Pelikan writing about the same things. And I know you and I, in our discussions of it, have described this as being, and it makes no difference where the person sits in terms of what church they are or what have you, because it's not about that. But how some people write about something and other people write out of its heart.
That's beautifully put. Pardon me.
Well, we must remember that this is an oration on Pentecost. And Pentecost is, that moment in the church, the church's revelatory year, which is saying that the Spirit of God makes whole. It makes whole. Did the dove just descend on you, Andrew?
I'm sorry. I was hoping I had an icon of Pentecost because I was going to reference the flames of fire, which are sometimes the manifold, as it were, shoots of fire, which are the gift that just what you're talking about. Go on.
And so that there is, I mean, am I Am I wrong here in thinking that when they spoke on Pentecost, they spoke simply? When you speak when you speak or listen or attend out of the heart of the matter, it's simple. In the sense that there is an integrity in it that you don't make, that the other doesn't make, but it arises. It's there. There is a presence there. And the difference between that and something which still can be very good, but isn't that. It can be about the same thing, but it isn't that. Is palpable. Am I making any sense, Michael?
Yeah, no, I'm absolutely transfixed. This is really interesting because this is always going to be a difficult subject as soon as we try to broach the simple and simplicity, something that perhaps intuitively praxis, and then try to contrast it with more, I don't know, artificial composite attempts to perhaps reach something analogously, whole, something to create integrity, and that's I don't. This gets back to our earlier conversation. I think even some of the most well-articulated appropriations of Christian ideals lack a kind of integrity. And when I say that, I feel a little bit, I don't want to mention examples, but certain social justice movements and environmental movements and so forth that are laudable within a certain context in many respects, have a kind of, I hope I don't contradict myself, but have a kind of overly simple form of integrity, because I think there's also an integrity that to pick up on a kind of paradoxical comparison that Andrew mentioned earlier. They stand in contrast to a transparent, clear, but fathomless form of value hierarchy that is really simple. And so it's a difficult conversation to walk around. So I really appreciate your thoughts.
David, let me respond to a handful. I mean, and following Michael, your lovely step forward there. David, it seems to me like what you were talking about is at the heart of our task of discernment, and the very hardest of our tasks of discernment. In appearance, a lie does not appear different than a truth, than a truth. And a sentence which is truthful can yet be a lie once it's vocalized, right? The difference between writing about, say, something as strange and abstruse as history, right? Pelican is remarkable in this. You can feel the presence. Many others treat it as a history of ideas, as you know. Pelican calls his the Christian tradition, the Christian continuity of meaning. And even more than the clarity of ideas, he seems to seek the relation between them. And at a very important part of his book on our tradition, our element of the Christian tradition, he brings to the forefront devotion and prayer. we say, and we will say again, but we say that when the fire is present, there is no need to articulate it. So in our tradition, when we articulate something, it's because it is felt but not richly felt. It needs to be felt more strongly, but it needs to be felt in its articulation as well. It seems to me like part of the issue that you are pointing to, David, is a kind of intellectual comprehension, but not an aesthetic living out. It's observing the distinction we make between ascesis or thinking and being, as if that's real. As part of what Maximus, I think, is trying to move us beyond, which is why we were phrasing it today in terms of our being and our making must be as one. Must be as one. They're not one. We're completing them by each other. Just like we've said in the past in this seminar, our body completes our thoughts, right? Or our thinking completes our body. They're not separate. Dostoevsky, now just to widen it a little bit out just for fun, Dostoevsky says that our ideas must be intensely felt, as you just really beautifully articulated there, David. Ezra Pound, in his beautifully capacious way, comments that one of the finest insights of Christianity, and then he says, the Chinese knew it beforehand, but he says one of the profoundest insights of Christianity is around sincerity. Sincerity. He wasn't reducing sincerity to public morality, but I think, or what I heard and what he was saying was that in the terms we use today, our being and our making must be as one. I understood sincerity after reading that through David's sense of presence as sincerity being present, enacted. It's the enaction of what David, well, our tradition, but my understanding is deeply formed by David's articulation of presence. When our being and making are as one, when we are sincerely present with another person, we're not looking to gain advantage over them, right? It's not us at the center of it. And so this might be risking an association, but at a certain point in his work, Heidegger, who struggled for a long time with the what's known as the subject-object distinction in Western metaphysics, was trying to determine a word for thinking that wouldn't involve I think. And so at one point he used the word appropriation, or the French version of that, to make one's own. But then for him, that even was too much of the subject. And so he used the word in English, owning. So it's like an action. It's the bringing into being of one's owning of it, one's familiarity of it. But it's not a taking for one's own. It is an entering into familiarity, into ownness of it. This, in a way, is an image of drawing near. It's an image of truth as intimacy, which is what Maximus teaches us. One does not speak lightly of what is intimate to one's soul. One cannot. One does not speak glibly of one's deepest loves. It's not fair to say that if something comes too simply, if articulation comes too simply, it is suspect. That's not the case, because some people we know are flow freely, as it were, in synergy. But there is something about what Maximus calls a felt reverence or humility that attends the words. This is mainly known in tone of voice, which is why we focus on tone sometimes. There is something profound about that. And you can, and like you're saying, David, you can just hear it. It's And this is what Gregory is talking about, this discernment. There's a discernment of gifts. Yeah, we're doing that, which stands in need of yet another gift for the discernment of what is better. What is better is not between good and bad, or between appropriate and not appropriate. It's difficult. It's thornier than that. It has to do with the mystery of what David calls presence, or what our tradition calls presence. It's what Christ manifested in every single encounter that we've written, well, written and unwritten, but that we have written down, this presence to the other person. But it's what we don't do when we just repeat other people's ideas. And somehow in that breaking down of integrity, in the mere repetition of others' ideas, which is what Maximus is talking about, and what David has had deep insight into over his whole time thinking. And Michael, you're my other teacher in this. I never felt a false word from either of you. And it's not that simple to say. You both are my teachers. It's not that simple to say, right? So the integrity that Maximus is talking about here, well, I admire it in each of you too, and strive for it myself. And I only say that because I think somehow it's odd, but we can kind of recognize what he's talking about here, but it's very hard to pinpoint an example in the moment. It's almost on the level of instinct, almost on the level of what we call habit sometimes, what Maximus calls habits. Habits is the rhythm of being and responding beyond immediate impulse. It's a manifestation of synergy. When we stop concerning ourselves with the other person and deepen our struggle to complete the gift we've been given in company with others, maybe that's one of the places where we find ourselves in sincerity, despite ourselves, as it were. Maximus says we are to approach these matters with reverence and humility. Sometimes when we do not feel the ideas we're saying, and we enter into combat over our ideas, we use our ideas to gain an advantage over another person. And we put our ideas into sentences that assume a form of attack to beat another person. And we can repeat all the truths of our tradition as a form of attack to beat another person. And that is everything true, dealing death. And that's what we're trying to script. But that's so that was a mishmash. That's what I hear in part of what you're saying, David, and that's what comes to mind. But pardon me, let me listen for a moment.
One of the conversations I had last term with my students at Newman, and I don't recall what prompted it, but it might have just been prompted by, oh yes, I recall now. This had to do with the matter of interreligious conversation or dialogue. And I mentioned to them that rightly or wrongly, I would not enter into a conversation with my Muslim or Jewish brothers and sisters about the incarnation or the Trinity. I mentioned that certainly for Muslims, in my experience, they often want to have that conversation right away, because the incarnation for them is such a blasphemy. So I talked a little bit about my sense that the incarnation, the revelation of the incarnation and of the Trinity, are the most intimate of the gifts of the Christian faith. And they should be treated the same way you would treat your most tender conversations with your beloved. It's not that you don't want other people to know, but you don't want them to make something of it. You don't want to turn it into pornography. And one of the tragedies, it seems to me, of so much Christian discourse has been to turn these most intimate unveilings, the incarnation and the Trinity, the most intimate unveilings, into pornography. So it was interesting with the students, because they're very serious Catholic students, and they're concerned that, you know, the church has the truth, which I agree. It doesn't actually have it. I would say it is a wonderful way of understanding where the truth is present. But I think they were, at least some of them were a little touched by that. They'd never really, I mean, I think it made the point that, as I think Maximus is really helping us with, that first of all, the Trinity and the incarnation aren't abstract doctrines. I mean, they may have been thought of that way, but that's not the point of them. The point of them is to unveil what it means to be human, and what it means to be attentive to what is unfolding, and what it means to draw near. So again, because I mean, I love theology and that sort of thing. I'm not suggesting that one can't talk about these things in a kind of abstract way, but I am saying be careful. Don't let that become what you think this is. And I was reminded when I was mentioning this to them of a comment I heard by a rabbi, I think on a television program in the United States a long time ago. My memory is that the rabbi was a lovely, friendly, well-spoken, had a beautiful presence. And he was talking to a couple of evangelicals who were also nice, good people. But the rabbi, in order to, I don't recall the context of the conversation, but he was trying to get their attention around something. And he said to them, for me as a Jew, I don't quite understand the way in which you want me to become a Christian. Like, why you go on about that? Now, I appreciate that you might want to tell me how beautiful your faith is. That's lovely. Tell me about it. It seems to me, he said, that it's a little bit like, well, it's a little bit like the fact that I married the most beautiful woman in the world. And I love her and adore her. And I would be happy to tell you a little bit about her. But I'm not inviting you to sleep with her. And he said, so I heard him saying to them, why don't you develop some respect for your faith? Some respect for its mystery, some respect for its wonder. And why don't you speak to me about it out of that? I think Maximus would have understood that immediately.
Yeah, there is something. I mean, I appreciate a distinction made in Orthodoxy between cataphatic and apophatic theology, but there is a sense in which theology just carried naturally the way many fundamentalist evangelical thinkers will do, just talking casually about their relationship with Jesus that seems like some their brother-in-law or something like this. And it has it's sort of a theologically latent way of talking that seems to not involve theology at all. But I think that there are some theological assumptions. And notwithstanding the distinction I just made, I have to say I have a distinctive aversion to theology per se. And I can only really encounter it through an apophatic approach. Even though through the liturgy, of course, it seems that you're approaching it another way, but you're really not if you're present, because if you are present, you're present to the poverty of your own understanding of almost every proposition you're hearing. You never actually grasp any of the propositions, even when you're reciting, as many Christians do, the Nicene Creed every Sunday. It's I can kind of sympathize with what you and Anna and the Orthodox tradition, how they much of the liturgy is sung, and I suppose that's a kind of aesthetic way of arresting a kind of overconfidence, kind of theologically pristine confidence in being able to actually formulate concepts that are essentially impossible to formulate or grasp. And I realize I'm talking in a way that could readily be misunderstood, because I can simultaneously say that I literally believe in the resurrection, and I don't fully understand, and I never will understand the fathomless depth of what I believe in. And those two dispositions aren't in conflict. It's just so I don't know. Yeah, theology. I still have a kind of. I feel like 40 years in the desert of atheism was a kind of a blessing, because it's left its mark on me I think in a positive way, because I don't mince words or mince the challenge I posed to myself when I did finally kind of crossed the threshold, it's not like I relinquished my scruples when I could finally get over the hurdle of believing the resurrection. So I'm not believing in some kind of false pretend sense, or in a purely metaphorical sense in which metaphor stands for nonsense or something like that. But rather with a kind of, I don't put it like this because it sounds self-congratulatory, but a kind of humility and doubt that is not a denigrating and reductive doubt, but the kind that opens oneself up to further and further doubts and fruits and connections that come to us unbidden. And so, yeah, no, I do feel, I'll just close with this, I do feel inclined sometimes, depending on what the situation is, to respond to people who speak in a denigrating way about the Trinity and try to, because they're the ones, of course, who prompted the conversation. But I would be loath, as you say, David, to introduce the concept to someone, because I suppose I'm just not prone to being an evangelist. Maybe it's a function of the kind of circles in which I move. It doesn't really wouldn't really fly. Anyways, I'll end on that little pathetic note.
Well, you were a boxer, not an evangelist, so it's a bit of a different tone, so to speak.
Yeah, I don't mind. I certainly don't mind trading punches. I mean, the new atheist kind of, I think it probably brought some people, because even when I was, I don't know, as a teenager, in some ways, I don't think I had, well, I probably did, but it's sort of proper to that age when you're an atheist, and you're pushing back against something. But my God, the sheer embarrassing poverty and arrogance of the new atheists, I think, was a kind of blessing. It really kind of woke up, for better or worse in some cases, kind of communion with secular community. Who knows? It probably helped prompt me into a kind of defensiveness, even as an atheist, defensiveness for something that I had invisibly appropriated in the ways that we were describing earlier.
Could I point one more thing out in this passage?
Please.
Please.
This is the passage in Ambiguum 68 that we read on 305. Or lest it perhaps be someone moved by vainglory or arrogate to himself the utterances of others, speaking and propounding things which he himself did not bring forth, winning praise through his lies, a pseudo-sage, shamelessly posing as the spurious father of orphaned words and ideas. There is only the word. There is only the word. So to become the spurious father of orphaned words is to treat the word, which is always present. It's always present, but we don't discern it. We're not present to it. So it's to turn the presence of the divine into something. which in fact is a kind of blasphemy. I mean, he's really describing how this comes about as well. It comes about through turning the word into words, ideas. And what is sin against the language?
Mhm. This may or may not make sense, but Michael, when you were just speaking, and then David talking about the spurious father, yeah, it's an image of father. It's an emptying, a gutting of fatherhood, which is our image, our metaphorical image of the gift. Just to come back to the distinctions Azulis made, because I think it's fascinating. Michael, part of what I think you seem to be saying in what you said was that when there's no participation in a living tradition, then the words do seem to become orphaned words and ideas. If we don't want to participate in the truth we propound, we tend to assume we already are there, communing with it. But as we heard, participation is our way into truth. So are we talking about a hastened communion then? Maybe?
What do you mean by a hastened?
Assumed, drawn too near too quickly, inappropriately.
Oh,
And so we speak
see.
intimately of things with which we are not actually intimate because we don't participate in them.
Well,
At the risk of expressing, sorry.
Can I just add something before you speak to that? I mean, there's two things going on there. One, which you just said, but the other thing that's going on there is, what are you doing to the other person?
Mhm.
You're banishing them. The word isn't between you. I'm sorry, Michael. I
No. I think I'll withdraw what I was saying, because that represents kind of consummate thought for me in this particular context.
And if the word is not with us, then we are bereft.
If the word is not with us, there's three there. Whatever is there is not the word.
Good. All right, let's end on that note. Thank you both very much. Until next time.
Thank you both.